Nobody could quite remember when Millbrook stopped being a regular town and started being something else entirely, something that would have sounded like pure fiction if you told it to anyone outside the city limits. The fog rolled in thick every morning around 5, and it didn't burn off until nearly noon, which gave the whole place this eerie, dreamlike quality that made folks question whether they were awake or stuck in some kind of weird nightmare. The town sat right in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense forests on 3 sides and a murky lake on the 4th, cut off from the rest of civilization by washed-out roads and bridges that nobody bothered to fix anymore. It wasn't like anyone was trying to leave or trying to get in, not since the change happened about 3 years back. The change, that's what everyone called it, both the living and the not quite dead, had divided Millbrook right down Main Street, literally and figuratively. On the north side, you had the humans, about 200 souls who'd managed to avoid getting bitten, scratched, or infected during those first chaotic weeks when everything went sideways. On the south side, you had the zombies, roughly the same number, folks who hadn't been so lucky but who'd somehow retained enough of their marbles to think, reason, and communicate, which was pretty much unheard of according to every zombie movie anyone had ever seen. These weren't your typical stumbling, moaning, brain-hungry monsters. Nah, these undead were sharp, calculating, and apparently just as interested in surviving as the humans were, which made the whole situation 1,000 times more complicated than anyone could have imagined. Marcus Webb stood at the edge of the demilitarized zone, which was really just a stretch of Main Street that both sides had agreed to keep neutral territory. He was 28, built like a linebacker, with close-cropped hair and a scar running down his left cheek from an incident during the early days that he didn't like talking about. He'd become something like the unofficial leader of the human side, not because he wanted the job but because someone had to step up and make decisions, and apparently, he was the guy who kept his head on straight when everything else was falling apart. Marcus squinted through the perpetual gloom toward the south side, where he could make out several figures standing in similar observation positions, watching the humans just as carefully as the humans watched them. "They're up to something," muttered Jake Patterson, who stood next to Marcus with a pair of binoculars pressed to his face. Jake was shorter, stockier, with a red beard that he'd let grow wild over the past few months and a nervous energy that made him bounce on his heels even when he was supposed to be standing still. "I can feel it, man. They've been too quiet this week." Marcus shook his head slowly. "Quiet's good, Jake. Quiet means nobody's fighting. Quiet means we might actually make it through another week without losing anyone. Quiet means they're planning something," Jake insisted, lowering the binoculars and turning to face Marcus with wide, anxious eyes. "You know how they operate. They think things through, run simulations or whatever it is zombies do. They're probably figuring out some clever way to cross the line and take what's ours." "What's ours?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You mean the canned goods in the grocery store that expired 2 years ago? The gas in the station that's probably turned to sludge by now? Come on, man. We've got the same problems they do. Resources are running out for everyone." That was the honest truth, and it kept Marcus up at night more than the threat of zombie invasion. Millbrook had been a small town to begin with, population maybe 800 before the change, and it wasn't exactly stocked for a long-term siege situation. The humans had secured the northern supermarket, the hardware store, and a few houses that still had supplies worth scavenging, but everything was finite. Food was getting scarce. Medicine was practically gone. And winter was coming, which meant they'd need heating fuel, warmer clothes, and a whole lot of luck to make it through to spring. The zombies had their own resource problems, from what Marcus could gather. They didn't need to eat regular food, something else sustained them, probably best not to think too hard about what, but they needed shelter from the elements just like anyone else, and their bodies, despite being undead, still required maintenance. He'd seen zombies across the neutral zone repairing buildings, organizing supplies, even tending to what looked like a garden, though what the heck they were growing was anyone's guess. "Meetings in 10, called out a voice from behind them. Marcus turned to see Rebecca Torres jogging up, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. Rebecca was sharp as a tack, a former high school math teacher who'd become the human side's chief strategist and negotiator. If there was a problem that needed solving with brains instead of brawn, Rebecca was the go-to person. Both sides? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Yep. They sent word an hour ago through the drop box. Neutral zone, noon sharp, representatives only. Rebecca glanced at her watch, an old wind-up model since batteries were worth their weight in gold these days. We've got just enough time to grab the others and get into position. Jake groaned. Another meeting. Another round of talking in circles while they stare at us with those creepy dead eyes. Hey, Rebecca snapped, her voice sharp enough to make Jake flinch. That kind of talk doesn't help anyone. They're still people, Jake. Different kind of people, sure, but people. They've got families on that side, folks they care about, same as us. They're dead, Becca. Dead people. And yet they're standing over there thinking the exact same things about us, probably calling us those warm-blooded idiots or something. Rebecca shook her head. The moment we stop seeing them as rational beings capable of negotiation is the moment this whole fragile piece falls apart, and then we're all screwed. Marcus appreciated Rebecca's perspective, even if he didn't always fully embrace it himself. It was hard to completely trust someone, something that used to be human but wasn't anymore, that looked mostly normal from a distance but had gray-tinged skin and moved with an unnatural stillness when they weren't in motion. Still, the alternative to talking was fighting, and fighting meant casualties on both sides, resources wasted, and the possibility that everyone in Millbrook, living or undead, might not survive. Let's round up the council and get this done, Marcus said, turning away from the neutral zone and heading back toward the safe zone, which was what they called the fortified area around the old town hall where most of the humans had set up their main base. 20 minutes later, Marcus sat at a long folding table in the middle of Main Street, right on the faded yellow dividing line that marked the border between territories. Across from him sat 3 zombies, and despite having done this dozens of times, he still felt that little jolt of instinctive fear when looking at them up close. The lead negotiator was a zombie named Thomas Brennan, a former banker who'd apparently been pretty successful before the change. Thomas still wore the remnants of a business suit, though it was tattered and stained now, and his skin had that distinctive gray pallor that all the undead shared. His eyes, though, those were the weirdest part, were milky white but somehow still expressive, still intelligent. Next to Thomas sat Vanessa Wright, younger, maybe mid-20s when she'd turned, with long blonde hair that she kept meticulously brushed, which struck Marcus as oddly vain for a zombie. She'd been a nurse at the small clinic in town, and apparently, she still maintained some medical knowledge, serving as the chief health officer for the undead, whatever that meant. The third zombie was an older guy named Harold Kim, a former mechanic who now kept the zombie side's vehicles and generators running, proving that skills didn't disappear just because your heart stopped beating. On Marcus's side of the table sat Rebecca, of course, along with Jackson Jack Reeves, a grizzled former cop in his 50s who'd seen just about everything and wasn't easily rattled, and Emily Dawson, a young woman barely out of college who'd been visiting her grandparents when the change happened and had gotten stuck in Millbrook. Emily had a background in environmental science and had become invaluable in helping the humans manage their limited resources sustainably. "Thanks for agreeing to meet," Thomas said, his voice surprisingly normal except for a slight raspy quality, like he had a mild cold. "We've got a situation that affects both our communities, and we figured it was better to address it together rather than let it turn into a conflict." Marcus leaned back in his chair, trying to look relaxed even though every muscle in his body was tense. "We're listening." Vanessa spoke up, her voice clearer than Thomas's. "The lake is dying. We've been running tests, yes, we still have some scientific equipment that works, and the water quality has deteriorated significantly over the past month. Algae blooms, bacterial contamination, probably due to runoff from the decomposing forest matter and lack of normal water flow since the dam upstream broke last spring. Emily leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. We've noticed the same thing. The water's been looking murky, and we've had to boil it longer to feel safe drinking it, not that we have unlimited fuel for boiling. Exactly, Harold said, his voice a low rumble. The lake's the only water source for everyone in Millbrook. Wells dried up or got contaminated in the first year. If we lose the lake, we all die, or, well, you all die, and we probably deteriorate to the point where we're no longer functional. Marcus exchanged glances with Rebecca, who gave him a subtle nod. This was serious. Water was even more critical than food, and if the lake went bad, they'd have maybe a week before things got desperate. What are you proposing? Jack asked, his cop instincts making him suspicious of any offer that sounded too cooperative. Thomas pulled out a rolled-up piece of paper and spread it on the table. It was a hand-drawn map of the lake and the surrounding area, surprisingly detailed. Before the change, the town had plans to install a water filtration system, something that could handle the lake's capacity and provide clean water to the whole community. The equipment was ordered and delivered, sitting in a warehouse on the east side of town, but installation never started because, well, everything went to hell. You want to build a filtration system, Rebecca said, studying the map. Together. It's the only way it works, Vanessa said. The warehouse is in what's technically neutral territory, but it's dangerous. Lots of unstable structures, possibly some of the feral ones hiding in there. The feral ones, that's what both sides called the zombies who hadn't retained their intelligence, who'd devolved into the mindless, aggressive creatures that movies had always portrayed. They were rare in Millbrook, maybe a dozen or so, but they were dangerous to everyone, attacking humans and intelligent zombies alike. Most of them had wandered off into the forest, but some still lurked in the ruins on the outskirts of town. So you need our help securing the equipment and installing it, Marcus said slowly, thinking through the implications. And in return? In return, everyone gets clean water, Thomas said simply. We're not asking for more than our fair share. We split the output 50-50, set up distribution points on both sides. This isn't a trick, Marcus. This is survival. Jake, who'd been standing guard nearby, couldn't help himself. How do we know you won't turn on us the second we're all working together? Get us out in the open and then attack? Vanessa's milky eyes fixed on Jake with an intensity that made him step back involuntarily. Because we'd die too, idiot. You think we're immune to dehydration? Our bodies may not work like yours anymore, but we still need water. Poisoning or attacking you means we lose the very thing we're trying to save. Everyone calm down, Marcus said, raising his hands. Let's think this through logically. What's the plan look like? How many people from each side? What's the timeline? What resources do we need to commit? Over the next hour, they hammered out the details. Each side would send 10 workers, the humans would provide more physically demanding labor since they had the stamina, while the zombies would handle the technical aspects since several of them had engineering or construction backgrounds from their previous lives. They'd work in shifts, never more than 20 people total at the site, with both sides keeping guards posted to watch for ferals or other dangers. The project would take an estimated 2 weeks if everything went smoothly, which it probably wouldn't, but even a month would be worth it if they ended up with clean water. We need guarantees, Jack insisted. Rules of engagement. If something goes wrong, if someone from either side steps out of line, how do we handle it? Tribunal, Rebecca suggested. 3 judges from each side. Anyone accused of breaking the agreement gets a fair hearing, and the tribunal decides consequences. Thomas nodded slowly. That's acceptable. We'd also suggest daily check-ins, representatives from both sides, to address any issues before they escalate. And the ferals? Emily asked. If we encounter them, what's the protocol? Harold grunted. Put them down. They're not one of us, not really. They're what happens when the infection takes everything away. We've got no love for them. Agreed, Marcus said. Ferals are enemies to everyone. Anyone spots one, you sound the alarm, and the nearest fighters handle it, regardless of which side they're from. They continued ironing out details until the sun had moved significantly across the sky, and Marcus's stomach was growling, reminding him that he'd skipped breakfast. Finally, they had something resembling a workable plan, written down on paper and signed by representatives from both sides, copies made for each community. As they stood to leave, Thomas extended his hand toward Marcus. It was a gesture so normal, so human, that Marcus almost forgot for a second what Thomas was. He looked at the outstretched hand, gray-skinned and slightly stiff, and felt everyone watching to see what he'd do. Refusing would be an insult, would undermine everything they'd just agreed to. Accepting meant acknowledging the zombies as equals, as partners. Marcus reached out and shook Thomas's hand. The skin was cool, not quite cold but noticeably lacking the warmth of living flesh. The grip was firm, controlled. "We'll make this work," Marcus said. "We'd better," Thomas replied. "For all our sakes." The next morning, the work began. Marcus led his team of 10 to the warehouse district as the sun was just starting to burn off the fog. He'd chosen people he trusted. Jake, despite his attitude, was strong and reliable in a fight. Emily brought her scientific knowledge. A guy named Carlos Martinez, who'd been a construction worker before the change, knew his way around tools and building. Others included Brenda Willis, a former soldier who kept everyone on task, Kevin O'Connor, young but dependable, Lisa Young, who had medical training, Travis Moore, good with electrical systems, Jennifer Lopez, no relation to the famous one, she always joked, who was fearless and quick-thinking, and Derek Smith, who was just solid in every way that mattered. The zombie team was already there when the humans arrived, which made Jake mutter something under his breath about the undead not needing sleep giving them an unfair advantage. Marcus recognized Vanessa and Harold from the meeting, along with 7 others he'd seen around the south side but never interacted with directly. One of them, a tall zombie with dark skin and what looked like dreadlocks, stepped forward and introduced himself as Marcus too, which created a moment of awkward humor. "Marcus Johnson," the zombie said. "Looks like we're named twins." "Marcus Webb," the human replied, managing a small smile. "Guess we'll need to be clear about which Marcus we're talking about." "I'll go by Johnson," the zombie offered. "Keep it simple." The warehouse was exactly as bad as Marcus had feared, worse, actually. The roof had partially collapsed on the east side, leaving jagged metal beams hanging like the ribs of some giant metal beast. Water damage had warped the floors, making every step a potential hazard. And the smell, God, the smell was something else, a mixture of mildew, rot, and something chemical that made your eyes water. "Fan out in pairs," Marcus Webb called out. "1 human, 1 zombie per team. We're looking for large shipping crates marked Millbrook Water Utility. According to the invoice, there should be 6 crates total, containing the filtration units, pipes, fittings, and installation equipment." There was a moment of hesitation. Nobody had expected to be paired with someone from the other side so immediately, but then Jennifer shrugged and walked over to one of the zombie workers, a woman who'd introduced herself as Patricia. "Come on, then. Let's find this stuff and get out of here. This place gives me the creeps." That broke the ice, and soon everyone was paired off, moving carefully through the warehouse. Marcus Webb found himself working with Johnson, the 2 of them heading toward the back section where larger items seemed to be stored. "So," Johnson said as they walked, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space, "this is weird, right? A few years ago, I was coaching Little League and worrying about mortgage payments. Now I'm dead, searching through a decrepit warehouse with a living person to find water filters so my zombie community doesn't fall apart." Despite himself, Marcus Webb chuckled. "Yeah, it's not exactly how I saw my late 20s going. I was supposed to be in Denver, working at a tech startup, probably married by now. Instead, I'm here, leading a bunch of survivors and negotiating with the undead. Tech startup, huh? What did you do? Software development. Nothing fancy, just back-end systems for businesses. Marcus stepped over a fallen beam, then offered a hand to help Johnson across, which felt surreal. You said you coached Little League? Yeah, and I taught high school history. Loved it, too. Kids were great, most of them anyway. Johnson's milky eyes seemed distant, like he was looking at something far away. I wonder sometimes what happened to them, the ones who weren't in Millbrook when it happened. They walked in silence for a bit, each lost in thoughts of the world beyond their isolated town. Then Marcus spotted something promising, large crates with official markings, stacked against the far wall. Hey! Over here, he called out, and soon the whole team had converged on the location. The crates were exactly what they needed, though getting them out of the warehouse and transported to the lake would be a whole other challenge. Carlos and one of the zombie engineers started assessing the weight and dimensions, figuring out what equipment they'd need to move them safely. That's when they heard it, a low, guttural moan that definitely didn't come from any of the intelligent zombies. Everyone froze. Feral, Harold said quietly, already reaching for the crowbar he'd brought as a tool and weapon. How many? Brenda asked, her military training kicking in as she positioned herself defensively. The moan came again, closer this time, and then they saw it, a zombie, but not like the intelligent ones. This thing was hunched, moving with a jerky, predatory gait, its clothes hanging in rags and its skin mottled with decay. Its eyes were completely black, no intelligence behind them, just hunger and aggression. Just one, Travis whispered. We can handle one. But then two more emerged from behind a stack of crates, and Marcus's stomach sank. 3 ferals in an enclosed space was dangerous for everyone. Formation, Marcus Webb said calmly, and the humans who'd practiced emergency procedures moved into a defensive semicircle. To his surprise, the zombies did the same, forming the other half of the circle so that both groups had their backs protected. The ferals attacked with that horrifying speed that made them so dangerous, but the combined group was ready. Harold swung his crowbar with precision, connecting with the first feral's skull and dropping it instantly. Brenda and one of the zombie workers named Marcus, it was getting confusing with multiple Marcuses, took down the second with a combination of a baseball bat and a length of pipe. The third feral actually made it through the perimeter, heading straight for Emily, who screamed and stumbled backward. Marcus Webb didn't think, just reacted, tackling the feral from the side and sending them both crashing into a stack of boxes. The creature was strong, snapping its teeth inches from his face, and for a terrifying second, he thought this was it, this was how he'd die and come back as one of them. Then Johnson was there, pulling the feral off with strength that no living person could match, holding it long enough for Kevin to finish it with a shovel. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds, but everyone was breathing hard. Well, the humans were, the zombies just looked tense, which was their equivalent. Everyone okay? Rebecca asked, doing a quick head count. Define okay, Jake muttered, but he nodded. Yeah, I'm good. Marcus Webb looked at Johnson, who'd literally saved his life. Thanks, man. Johnson shrugged. You'd have done the same. We're in this together now, remember? And that was the turning point, Marcus realized later. That moment when theory became practice, when the cooperation they'd talked about in meetings became real action. After that, the work went smoother. The two groups weren't just tolerating each other, they were actually working together, playing to each other's strengths. The zombies never got tired, so they handled tasks that required sustained effort. The humans had better fine motor control, so they dealt with detailed assembly work. They shared meals, or rather, the humans ate while the zombies kept watch, and then they'd switch so the humans could guard while the zombies did whatever it was they did to maintain themselves. Over the next week, the water filtration system slowly took shape at the lake's edge. It was impressive watching Carlos and the zombie engineers collaborate, combining practical construction knowledge with technical expertise. They hit snags, of course, missing parts, incompatible fittings, unexpected complications with the lake bed's composition, but each time, they problem-solved together, both sides contributing ideas. In the evenings, After work crews rotated out, Marcus Webb found himself actually having conversations with the zombies that went beyond logistics. He learned that Vanessa missed the taste of coffee more than anything, that Harold had been married for 30 years before the change and his wife was on the human side of town and they sometimes just stood on opposite sides of the neutral zone looking at each other, that Patricia had been 3 months pregnant when she turned and that loss haunted her every day. "We're not monsters," Vanessa said one evening as they watched the sun set over the lake, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "We're just people dealing with an impossible situation, same as you." "I'm starting to see that," Marcus admitted. "It's hard, though. Everything we've been taught, every movie we've ever seen, says you're the enemy. And everything about our situation says we should be mindless killers," Vanessa countered. "But we're not. We held on to who we were, fought to stay ourselves. That should count for something." By the end of the second week, the filtration system was operational. They ran tests, checked and double-checked the output, and finally, on a cloudy afternoon that threatened rain, clean water flowed for the first time. Both sides had gathered at the lake, humans on one side, zombies on the other, watching this miracle of cooperation. Emily filled a glass with the filtered water and tested it with their remaining chemical strips. "It's clean," she announced, her voice thick with emotion. "It's actually clean." A cheer went up from the human side, and the zombies made their equivalent expression of satisfaction, a collective exhale that sounded almost like a sigh of relief. Thomas and Marcus Webb met at the center, where the main pipeline split into 2 distribution branches. "We did it," Thomas said. "Together." "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "We did." But that's when things got complicated, because success had drawn attention. That night, as both sides celebrated in their respective territories, a scout came running into the human safe zone with news that chilled everyone to the bone. "There's people coming," the scout, a teenager named Amy, gasped out. "Real people, from outside Millbrook. A whole convoy of them, heading up the old highway." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Outsiders. They'd been isolated so long, they'd almost forgotten there was a world beyond their fog-shrouded town. "How many?" "At least 50, maybe more. Trucks, weapons, looks like some kind of organized group." Jack immediately went into tactical mode. "Could be military, could be raiders, could be survivors looking for resources. Either way, they're going to find a town split between living and undead, and they're probably going to have opinions about that." Rebecca paced, thinking fast. "We need to tell the other side. If this group is hostile, they'll attack the zombies first, and if the zombies fall, we're next. Or they'll try to rescue us from the zombies," Emily pointed out. "Either way, everything we've built, this piece we've managed, it's all at risk." Marcus made a decision. "Get word to Thomas. Emergency meeting, neutral zone, 1 hour. We need a plan." The meeting happened fast, both sides sending their key people despite the late hour. Thomas looked as worried as a zombie could look, which was saying something. "We've seen them too," he confirmed. "Our scouts tracked them to about 5 miles out. They've set up camp for the night, but they'll be here by morning." "Any idea who they are?" Jack asked. Harold spoke up. "One of ours got close enough to hear some conversation. They're calling themselves the Reclamation Force. Sounds like they're going around to small towns, clearing them of zombies and establishing safe zones for survivors." "Clearing," Vanessa repeated bitterly. "That's a nice way of saying exterminating us." "They don't know you're intelligent," Rebecca said. "They probably think this is just another overrun town." "So we explain," Johnson suggested. "Show them what we've built here, the cooperation, the filtration system. Prove that there's another way." Jake shook his head. "People don't want another way. They want simple answers. Dead things are monsters, living things are victims. That's the story they know." "Then we change the story," Marcus Webb said firmly. "We show them that Millbrook is different. But we need to present a united front. If they see division, confusion, they'll exploit it." They talked through the night, developing a strategy that felt impossibly risky but was the only option that didn't end in violence. When the reclamation force arrived the next morning, they'd find something they never expected. The convoy rolled into Millbrook just after dawn, the fog still thick enough to obscure visibility. The lead truck stopped at the south entrance to town, and heavily armed people poured out, fanning into tactical positions. Their leader, a hard-looking woman in her 40s with military bearing, stepped forward with a megaphone. "Attention any survivors in Millbrook," her voice boomed through the empty streets. "This is Commander Rachel Price of the Reclamation Force. We're here to secure this area and evacuate any living people. If you can hear this, make your way to the south checkpoint. We have food, medical supplies, and transportation to a safe zone in Colorado." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, figures began emerging from buildings on both sides of Main Street. Humans and zombies, walking together, standing side by side. They'd agreed on this presentation, show the reclamation force immediately that this town operated differently. Commander Price's expression went from confident to confused to hostile in about 3 seconds flat. "What the hell is this?" she muttered, then raised her weapon. "Survivors, step away from the infected. Get clear so we can engage." Marcus Webb stepped forward, hands raised and empty. "Commander Price, my name is Marcus Webb. I'm the civilian leader of Millbrook's human population. Before you do anything, we need to talk." "Talk?" Price looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "Son, you're standing next to the enemy. You've clearly been here too long, maybe developed some kind of Stockholm syndrome. Just come with us, and we'll sort this out." "The enemy," Thomas said, stepping up beside Marcus Webb, "is ignorance and fear, Commander. We're not what you think we are." Price's soldiers raised their weapons, targeting Thomas and the other zombies. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. One wrong move, one nervous trigger finger, and this whole thing would explode into violence. "Let me show you something," Rebecca called out, walking forward with her hands also raised. "Just one thing before you make any decisions. Give us 5 minutes." Price looked skeptical but curious. 5 minutes. But my people stay on high alert." They led the commander and a small group of her soldiers to the lake, where the filtration system hummed quietly, processing water for both communities. Emily explained the technical details, how it worked, how it had been built. Carlos showed them the construction, pointing out which parts had been handled by humans and which by zombies. "This was impossible without cooperation," Marcus Webb explained. "We had the labor, they had the technical knowledge. Together, we built something that keeps everyone alive, and I do mean everyone, because these zombies aren't like the ones you've encountered. They think, they plan, they feel. They're people, Commander, just different kinds of people." Price walked the length of the filtration system, her expression unreadable. Finally, she turned back to face them. "I've seen some weird things since the world ended, but this takes the cake. How do I know this isn't some trick? That they're not controlling you somehow?" Vanessa stepped forward. "Because if we could control people, Commander, we wouldn't be living in a half-ruined town struggling to survive. We'd have built an army and taken over functioning cities. We're here because we're trapped same as the humans, trying to make the best of a bad situation." "She's right," added Harold. "Look, I get it. You fought zombies, probably lost people to them. The feral ones, the mindless ones, they're dangerous and they need to be stopped. But we're not them. We're the ones who held on to our humanity even after our bodies died." Commander Price was quiet for a long time, thinking. Her soldiers looked uncertain, caught between training that said zombies were threats and the evidence in front of them that suggested otherwise. Finally, Price spoke. "I need to think about this. Consult with my officers. But I'll tell you what I'm willing to do, we'll set up camp outside of town, neutral territory. No action against your zombie population for 72 hours while we assess the situation. In return, I want full transparency. Tours of both sides of town, interviews with people from both communities, access to your records and documentation of how this arrangement works. Marcus Webb looked at Thomas, who nodded slightly. Deal. We've got nothing to hide. The next 3 days were intense. Commander Price and her team conducted what felt like the most thorough investigation in history, interviewing everyone, examining every aspect of Millbrook's divided society. They saw the trading system that had developed, where humans exchanged items they could scavenge for services the zombies could provide. They witnessed the tribunal system in action when a dispute arose over resource allocation. They observed work crews collaborating on repairing buildings, maintaining infrastructure, planning for winter. And slowly, grudgingly, the reclamation force began to see what Millbrook had become, not a war zone, but a weird, fragile, unprecedented experiment in coexistence. On the evening of the third day, Commander Price called a meeting with both communities' leadership. Her expression was serious but not hostile, which Marcus took as a good sign. "I've made my decision," she announced. "The reclamation force will not take action against Millbrook's zombie population. What you've built here is unique, and while it goes against every protocol we've established, I can't justify destroying something that's actually working." Relief flooded through the room, but Price held up a hand. "However, there are conditions. First, Millbrook remains quarantined. We can't risk these intelligent zombies spreading to other communities until we understand the mechanism better. Second, we'll establish a monitoring station nearby, regular check-ins to ensure the situation remains stable. Third, any feral zombies in the area get eliminated immediately, no exceptions." Thomas nodded. "Those terms are acceptable. What about supplies? We're running low on things we can't produce ourselves." "We can arrange supply drops," Price said. "Medical supplies, tools, things you genuinely need. Consider it a research investment. Studying your community might help us understand the infection better, maybe find ways to help others retain their intelligence if they turn." Emily leaned forward eagerly. "We'd be willing to participate in research. Blood samples, neurological scans if you have the equipment, whatever might help." "Both sides?" Price asked, looking between the humans and zombies. "Both sides," Marcus Webb confirmed. "We're in this together." Over the next weeks, Millbrook adjusted to its new reality. The reclamation force set up a small outpost about a mile outside town, close enough to monitor but far enough to respect the community's autonomy. Supply drops came every 2 weeks, bringing precious resources that made survival significantly easier. Researchers visited occasionally, studying the intelligent zombies and trying to understand what made them different from the ferals. More importantly, the contact with the outside world brought information. They learned that there were other survivor communities scattered across the country, some thriving, some barely hanging on. The zombie infection had spread globally but wasn't as total as they'd feared. Lots of places had managed to contain it or survive the initial outbreak. The world hadn't ended, just changed dramatically. For Millbrook, things gradually got better. The filtration system continued providing clean water. Humans and zombies developed more sophisticated trade and cooperation systems. A zombie named Patrick, who'd been a farmer before turning, worked with Emily to develop a greenhouse system that could produce fresh vegetables year-round, with humans providing daytime maintenance and zombies handling nighttime temperature regulation. Harold's wife, Margaret, who'd been on the human side, finally crossed the neutral zone one evening. The reunion was heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time. She was old and gray, he was frozen in undeath, but the love between them was still clearly alive. They couldn't touch the way they used to, but they could still talk, still be together in whatever way the situation allowed. "It's not perfect," Margaret said to Marcus Webb one day, watching her husband work on repairing a generator. "I miss what we had, who he was. But having him here, even like this, is better than losing him completely." That, Marcus thought, summed up Millbrook pretty well. Not perfect, not what anyone would have chosen, but better than the alternatives. Better than endless war, better than extinction for either side, better than giving up their humanity, or their undead equivalent. 6 months after the Reclamation Force's first visit, Millbrook had become something of a legend in survivor communities. the town where humans and zombies lived in peace, where cooperation replaced conflict, where intelligence mattered more than biological status. Other communities sent representatives to visit, to learn, to see if the model could be replicated elsewhere. Marcus Webb stood at the border of the neutral zone, watching the daily exchange of goods and services, humans and zombies working side by side like it was the most natural thing in the world. Jake approached, no longer quite so suspicious of their undead neighbors. "You ever think about how crazy this all is?" Jake asked, but he was smiling. "Every single day," Marcus admitted. "But it works. Against all odds, it actually works. Think it'll last?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I think as long as we keep choosing cooperation over conflict, as long as we remember that we're all just trying to survive in a world that's gone sideways, yeah. It'll last." Across the neutral zone, Thomas raised a hand in greeting, and Marcus returned the gesture. They'd come a long way from those first tense meetings, from suspicion and fear to something that might not be friendship exactly but was definitely mutual respect and trust. The fog rolled in as evening approached, giving Millbrook that eerie, dreamlike quality it always had. But these days, the fog didn't feel quite so ominous. It felt like a blanket, something that isolated them from the rest of the world's chaos and let them exist in their strange little bubble where the rules were different. Inside a mysterious town where humans and zombies stood opposite each other, they'd discovered that the greatest battles weren't fought with weapons but with words, with understanding, with the willingness to see past differences and find common ground. It wasn't the story anyone expected, but it was the story Millbrook had written for itself, a battle of wits over brutality, where everyone won by refusing to fight. And somewhere in the night, both living and undead slept easier knowing that tomorrow, they'd face whatever challenges came not as enemies, but as allies in the most unlikely partnership the apocalypse had ever seen.